Well, thank you, Lynn. It's a good passage, wasn't it, to give Lynn to read, because she's always good at reading all the complicated words. So good morning. How are you guys doing on this bank holiday weekend? We've been looking at this series on heroines of the Old Testament and just looking at some of these women. And lots of favourites, aren't there, in the Old Testament of men and women of faith who we look up to and who we can learn so much from. And Hannah is certainly one of those. In many ways, she may be, compared to some of the other women heroines from the Old Testament that we've looked at, much more familiar. And so I really want to encourage you this morning to ask God, to stop now and just say to God, God, I want to hear what you want to say to me through this story this morning. What is it that you want to speak to me about? I think there's loads in this story. So as we go through and look at it, I think actually there's loads to challenge each one of us, loads that God could encourage us with. So just be open to what God wants to say to you. Life can be a huge challenge, and as I look around and see some of you out there, I would know what some of those challenges are for some of you, but for others of you, I'll be totally unaware of what's going on. But life is a huge challenge. We often have the good things going on, don't we? We have the mountaintops, the things we want to celebrate. We have the experiences that are the good things in our lives, the holidays, the time with friends, with family. There may be new adventures that we're starting on, maybe it's a new job or moving into a new home or whatever it might be, that are those things that give us kind of a sense of purpose and of fun in our lives. But we also have the struggles and the pain. We have the valleys that we go through. So maybe things like at the moment, Simon's already mentioned, the news and how we kind of get bombarded by stuff that just kind of feels so heavy, doesn't it? And we think, oh, no, not. So we've been through or still going through the COVID pandemic, and now there's all these challenges with the cost of living and the energy prices, as we've heard this week, just going up, just to kind of unbelievable levels that we cannot believe what we see happening around us again and again. It may be that we have difficult relationships that we are hanging onto and don't quite know what to do in them, how to deal with them, difficult relationships within family, friends, work colleagues, within family, whatever it might be. So we have these challenges that are going along as well. We may have illness for us or for people we love. We may have loss that we're struggling with, where people that we love have died. We may have jealousy over something, maybe a person, it may be possessions, it could be all sorts of things, but jealousies that we carry and longings, as we see with Hannah in this story. So longings for something that we would love to happen, but that we haven't yet seen come to fruition or hasn't happened for us. So let's look this morning at how can we, with all of this stuff that we juggle, with all of this going on, how can we come to a place of peace? How can we find peace even amidst the things that we find difficult, whether they're for us personally or they're within a much bigger setting of what's going on in society around us? Let's pray. Lord God, we've been singing and we believe you are the Almighty God, that you are all-powerful, that you are able to do so much more than we can possibly imagine. Lord God, help us this morning just to open our hearts and our minds. Help us to see afresh how you are there reigning on the throne, that you see the big picture and you see the details of our individual lives. Lord God, we just ask you to speak to us, and Father, we ask you that we will be able to hear what it is that you're saying to each one of us. So Holy Spirit, we just welcome you. Just come and fill this place this morning. Come and meet with us, come and speak with us, come and encourage us, come and challenge us, come and show us how much you love us. In Jesus' name, amen. So what was going on here in Hannah's life? So we've heard this story just read to us about Hannah, who was longing and had been longing for a long, long time, many, many years, longing for a baby. But as well as that, she had this difficult marriage to deal with. She had difficult relationships. Hannah lived in a time that was challenging because she lived in a time when polygamy was accepted and was part of what was going on. So she had arrival within her marriage, she had this other lady, Peninnah, who was Elkanah's wife, and she had to live in a home alongside Peninnah as well as with her husband Elkanah. And Peninnah would taunt Hannah cruelly. It says in verse 6 and 7, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. In order to irritate her. You know, you can see that this was unkind. This was not a good thing that was happening here. This went on year after year. And Hannah went up to the house of the Lord. So whenever she went up to the house of the Lord, this would be happening. Her rival would provoke her till she wept and would not eat. So you can see that for Hannah, you know, she had this pain already, this pain of this longing for a child and not conceiving a child. And that then Peninnah, who had children, would provoke her, would rub it in and rub it in and rub it in until Hannah would cry, would weep with the pain that she felt. Words people say to us can be really painful, can't they? I don't know if you can think of something that someone has said to you that you know has been really painful. Or it might be that you can think of something that maybe you've said to someone else that you know has been painful for them. The Bible tells us that Elkanah, her husband, that he loved Hannah. You know, maybe there was jealousy going on here. Maybe Peninnah was jealous of Hannah and felt that somehow Elkanah loved her more than he loved, that he loved Hannah more than he loved Peninnah. And so in this complex situation, and, you know, again, I think you could relate this and think to how often in friendships or in family or whatever else, we can feel jealous. We can feel that someone else is somehow pushing us out, that maybe someone else is favored over us in a work situation, in a family situation, in a friendship circle, whatever it might be, to feel that someone else is somehow pushing us out and that somehow they're being favored above us. You know, Hannah would have to see Peninnah's children playing. It says in verse 4 that all her sons and daughters, so she obviously had quite a few children, Peninnah did. And Hannah would have to watch and see those children, and that would just compound that pain that she had. She would see the way that other people looked at her. And again, you know, it might be that you feel somehow there's ways in which you see people look at you. I was speaking to someone a couple of months ago, and they said, you know, the way that people looked at them in the school playground. And I said, well, are you sure that's how they were looking at you? You know, is it? And she said, oh, no, I know it was. So it might be right, it might not be, but the way that people look at you, or the way that people were looking at Hannah. Hannah would have felt ashamed and unfulfilled. She would have been looked down upon within her community because she was childless. At the time that she was living, you know, that would have been a way of her being as if there was seen as something wrong with her for some reason because she didn't have children. So all these expectations that we can have in life of how it should be, of how we've expected it to turn out, and then things don't quite work out in the way we want them to. Things can turn out differently, and the pain we feel in that. I believe that God is really wanting to bring healing this morning to some of us for hurts that we have, that we're living with. Hurts of ways people have spoken over us, or of jealousies that we may have that we find it hard to be able to rein in and to live with in a way that we know is good and the way God would want us to. So how can you find peace? So here's Hannah struggling with these challenging, difficult relationships. She's got the relationship with Peninnah, and then there's her husband, Elkanah, who tries to show Hannah how much he loves her, doesn't he? He tries to give her more meat, more of the meat that would have been sacrificed to say, you know, Hannah, I really love you. I want to show you how much I love you. I want to comfort you. I want to be there for you. So he's trying to show her how much he loves her. He says to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? And yet I wonder, as I was reading that, whether Hannah felt somehow misunderstood. You know, perhaps she felt, well, he doesn't know. He doesn't understand what I'm feeling. He doesn't understand the pain I'm feeling. You know, yes, he is important to me, but maybe she felt that he didn't understand. And then later when she goes into the temple and she's praying, and And Eli, he doesn't understand, does he? He thinks that she's drunk. So rather than seeing for Hannah what's going on, she feels misunderstood. And again, for us, I think, we can often feel, can't we, misunderstood, as if people don't get what it is that we're feeling, what it is that we're going through, why we feel so hurt, or why we're so challenged in various situations. I think there's few subjects that touch us as deeply as when we look at family and look at our families and where the challenges are within our families and the pain that we can sometimes feel. So family can bring us much joy, but it can also bring a lot of pain. We're going to be looking at family matters in a series we're doing in October, when we'll be looking at the ups and downs and dealing with more of the issues of family life and the challenges there are. But the challenges are of us being family together, church family here at St Andrews for us, and how that is a challenge too. So here Hannah was in a state of depression. It says there in the story that she wept and was unable to eat. So it's not just that she's not eating, but actually that she can't physically eat because she's in that state of being so depressed that she's unable to eat. High points in our lives can often be those family times of celebrating together, and I thought you'd find this picture amusing. So weddings, they're one of those things that can be the high points in life. Yes, that is Simon. I didn't have two husbands. That's not a different husband. That is Simon many years ago when we got married here at St Andrews 36 years ago. But weddings and things like that, they can be the high point, can't they, in our family times in our lives of celebrating other people's weddings or celebrating our own. But they can also be a great time of pain. They can be low points. They can bring to the surface that longing that we might have to be married or to be part of something that we're not part of. They can be a time when those difficult relationships get rubbed. We get together as family, and where there's tension, then those tensions come out of the difficulties of whatever it might be to do with the wedding celebration or just getting everybody together. So Hannah had all of that going on. She had hopelessness of feeling that the things of her circumstances were not going to change. This had gone on for years and years, so the hopelessness of feeling that nothing is going to change. Hannah's expectations of how life would turn out were crushed. She felt defeated. Year after year, the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. And this went on year after year. Now, within her culture, children would have been seen as a sign of God's favor. And I'm sure that, one of the things that Peninnah would use to provoke Hannah to wind her up would be saying something along those lines of, God's favor's on me, look at all my children, but his favor's not on you, Hannah. You haven't had any children. So it would appear that way. But then it made me think, and I started looking, what does it actually mean, that phrase there where it says that God had closed her womb? The Lord had closed Hannah's womb. I looked up online to see what it said. It said there's an idiom of permission that was used by Hebrews as they were writing. It would be like saying in Exodus 9, verse 12, where it said God had hardened Pharaoh's heart. That God doesn't actually harden it, but he allowed Pharaoh's heart to become hard, just like he allows with us for our hearts to become hard in certain situations and circumstances. So I don't believe that Hannah's womb was closed by God. I don't believe that he closes wombs today. The truth is that all sin and death is brought into this world by Satan, not by God. So it would be much better translated to say that God allowed Hannah's womb to be closed, that God allowed her womb to be closed. So the question of why God allows suffering is such a huge one. Why doesn't he step in? We know God is the Almighty. We've been singing that. We believe that. God's the same as he was yesterday. He's the same today. He's the same into the future. He can do it. And yet we see the pain and the suffering go on. So why doesn't he step in? There's a book that I've been reading that we've actually recommended to lots of you guys, and you will have heard Mike Jones recommend it before, which is Straight to the Heart of Revelation, looking through the book of Revelation by a guy called Phil Moore. And he says this, he says, God is not only good enough to care about suffering and strong enough to prevent it, but he's also wise enough to see the fruit yielded through suffering. If God is strong enough to blame for our suffering, he must also be big enough to trust in the midst of it. We can't have it both ways. So, do we believe that God is big enough that actually he can see what can be achieved through suffering? I'm not saying he gives the suffering, but he can see what will be achieved through it. He's big enough for us to trust, even in the midst of the suffering. And the book that I would recommend, it came up a moment ago, but if suffering is something that you're really challenged by and thinking, God, I can't get my head around why you're allowing this, I'd just encourage you to read Pete Gregg's book, God on Mute. He's writing out of his own pain story of his wife's suffering there and the suffering that he felt through that. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us to work through, but I encourage you to read that book if that's something that you need to do at the moment. I think all of us, as I've said earlier, have different struggles and pains and challenges that we go through. And I want to invite up Hannah. Now, it's very applicable really today, isn't it, that I invite Hannah up because we're looking at Hannah. And Hannah is our eldest daughter, and many of you will know something of Hannah's story already. But I wanted Hannah to come up and give her testimony and talk about her own story of pain, of going through infertility. So I'm going to hand over to you, Hannah.
Is that okay? Is that the right? Yeah. So as Mum said, some of my story you might have heard before, you might know it if you know me at all. But when myself and my husband Dale decided that we wanted to have a baby, we approached this journey and we felt kind of like most couples, I guess, pretty excited, full of hope. We knew there might be some difficulties, but still really hopeful, and because of that, kind of praying as well. And 1 year later, I fell pregnant, and it felt like, wow, God's answered the prayer, this is it. But about 10 or 11 weeks into that pregnancy, I had some bleeding and had to go for a scan. And we heard those 4 little words that change everything, that there was no heartbeat and that I'd had a miscarriage. And it wasn't what we expected. We'd heard that there had been some bleeding and asked people to pray, and it wasn't the answer we expected. So we started to grieve for this child that we weren't going to get to meet this side of heaven, but ultimately started to continue trying for a baby. But as that journey went on, month after month, if you've ever been on that journey, the roller coaster of hope and then disappointment. And as it went on month after month and then eventually year after year, it just became more and more painful. That longing, that aching for a child, as you might know, or for other people longing for different things in your life, it can be so all-consuming and it never really goes away. And it felt like it became more and more isolating, really, as it felt like every friend, every family member, even every colleague or gym instructor as you go to a new gym class would announce their pregnancy as you walk in the door, There was a moment when my next door neighbour was pregnant, the person working in the next door classroom was pregnant, and it felt like every time I went into the staff room or met a friend, they'd announce their pregnancy. I felt like I couldn't even walk down the road without seeing however many pregnant bellies, and I'd have to cross to the other side of the road because it would be too painful to even be near these women. I didn't even know who they were. And it felt so isolating because as you're in that stage of life and all of your friends often have children or are pregnant, and I found it so difficult to be around those reminders of what wasn't happening for us. It just felt so painful. And alongside that, there were hospital visits and doctor's appointments and test after test, and waiting for however many months for the next tests, and then feeling like you don't quite know where it's going. The hospital appointments would just kind of raise the bar of when you might get some help or some treatment or some answers. And it really just kind of spirals and seems to go on and on. And as the journey went on, my mental health really began to suffer. And I guess several years in, really, I really recognised that place of sorrow and desperation in Hannah's story, because I got there myself and I really reached this point of depression. And life felt so hard and so heavy. I think the best way that I can describe it is it felt like there was this cloud of sadness and grief, and it didn't matter if I was doing my favourite things, if I was with people who loved me. Nothing would take that pain away. It was there all the time, every waking moment and every moment where I couldn't sleep. And life was just so hard. It felt so painful, and to me, I couldn't see a way forward. I couldn't really see a way out anymore. It felt like there was so much darkness, and I'd pushed so many friends away, and it almost felt like everything had got so messy that even if at some point God answered it, how could all these things be restored? I guess in my depression as well, I just couldn't see a way forward. And I remember saying to close friends or family or whatever, like, I don't want to live anymore. Like, I can't see how I can keep going through this. I don't know how to keep going forward. And I guess I'd really lost any hope or any faith of God being able to really answer it fully. I think I had that for a long time, but I feel like I guess kind of lost that at some point. But throughout our journey, there were so many amazing people praying for us. I think a large percentage of the church was involved in praying, and so many wonderful people standing alongside us. And I think really I was carried along by their prayers, to be honest. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about church family, is sometimes we just need to kind of float along on the prayers of others when we lose sight of it for ourselves. And I think I felt like I was really clinging onto God by, the ends of my fingernails. But, God is so big and so strong, and that's okay, and he had me by his hands. And I think his faithfulness is just so evident as I look back, and I might have been clinging onto God and then pushing him away and then pulling him back, but he wasn't going to let me go, and he faithfully pursued me. And in this story that we hear in the Bible, Hannah really finds peace as she lays it all before God. And I think I did have moments of that and glimpses, particularly earlier on. But as I look back, particularly as the journey kind of went on, I don't really feel like I was able to find that peace and let God in and surrender. Watchman Nee tells this story of how he was talking at a Christian function, and a man came up to him afterwards and explained that he'd found out his wife had been unfaithful to him for 2 or 3 years with one of his best friends, and had now left him for his best friend and taken their 2 children with him. And he explained how he'd been trying for 2 years to work through this and forgive them and let go of this anger that he held in his heart, but he hadn't got anywhere. And Watchman Nee says to him, do nothing. He says, the only way to get through this and to forgive them is for you to say to God, I can't do this, you need to do this through me. God is waiting until you cease to do, and then God will begin. And he uses this illustration of a drowning man that I really kind of recognize in myself. And he says, it's impossible to save someone who is drowning when they're thrashing their arms and their legs around, and in their fear and their desire to be rescued, if you try and rescue them when they're just thrashing around, they will pull you under the water too. He says there's only 2 solutions, 2 ways forward. The first one is that you knock them out and drag them to the shore. And the second one is that you wait for their strength to fail. You wait for them to stop desperately dragging and clawing at you. And God is waiting for our store of strength to be utterly exhausted before he can deliver us. Once you've ceased to struggle, he will do everything. And I think in my fear and my grief and my despair, I was like that person thrashing around in the water. And I couldn't quite let go enough to really give it to God like Hannah does and to leave it there. Almost my pain was part of my identity by that point. And if I even let go a little bit, then what did I have left by that point? But I think if we want to find peace, we have to find some way of surrendering that to God. And I don't mean that we have to stop questioning God. I don't mean that we have to let go of the questions or the doubts or the anger. I think we need to take that to God. And the Psalms are that beautiful example, aren't they? Many of them, of how we lament. And we need to bring that stuff before God and not just pretend it's not there, but as well as that, we have to have that stillness and that giving stuff over to God if we want to know that peace. So those of you who don't know, my story, like Hannah's, ended with a son. And I fell pregnant with Zach, who brought so much joy and was the answer, not really just to my prayers, but the answer of the prayers of so many. And yeah, I guess still when I look at him, he's the reminder of that answered prayer by God, and he's 2 now, and you might have seen him up on the front earlier. And baby number 2, as you might be able to tell, is soon to make an arrival. But yeah, I just also felt like I wanted to add, I guess, a caveat, because when we share from the front, often we share the wrapped up, neat parts of our testimony, don't we? But life isn't really like that. And as Mum said, life is often on 2 tracks. There's often the highlights and the lowlights, but often they go alongside each other or at the same time. And there's still things that it isn't the right time to share, but, you know, big unanswered prayers or prayers that won't be answered this side of heaven, or that I won't really know why they happened. But yeah, this is a story of where God did miraculously step in and answer. And for me, so much of that healing came later on, I guess, as I was pregnant and following the birth of Zach and finding that peace and wrestling through those things that we'd gone through.
So thank you, Hannah, for sharing that with us. And I think much like what Hannah said, it can be the same with us. It may even have been the same with Hannah, the story of Hannah in the Old Testament that we read, that she may have, each time she went to go to the temple, have gone to God and cried out to him again and again. It might only have been that time then she came to that place of peace. If God hadn't answered her, would she have lost that peace? She may have done. You know, again, we don't know all these answers to some questions like that. But the answer we do know is that if we come to God and come before him, and she came before him, as it says, in bitterness of soul, and wept much and prayed to the Lord. She was being real with him, wasn't she? She was coming to him and just laying it all there before God, not feeling she had to be somehow different with God, but she was bringing her rawness, her pain, all of that stuff to God and coming before him with it. And what I'm wanting to say is that we can do that again and again. We can lose the peace that we have with God and come back to go to him again and ask him for it. The soul is the seat of our emotions, of our passions. It's the core of our being. And that's where she felt this bitterness. And we can allow this bitterness, this anger, this disappointment, this hurt, this feeling of being unfairly treated, whatever it might be, to take us into that place of knowing that things aren't right and wrestling with that and needing to come before God. And Hannah's prayer, she prays, she says, "O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." Or as the Message version, the Message translation of the Bible puts it, it says, if you take a good, hard look at my pain, you know, come on, God, look at my pain. I want you to see the pain that I'm in, to understand where I'm at. If you quit neglecting me and go into action for me, by giving me a son. I will give him completely, unreservedly to you. So Hannah's hope was in God. She knew that she couldn't sort this. I think that would be my natural inclination in every scenario if I could, and probably each one of us, to want to sort it myself, to see how can I fix this? What can I do? What would be the things that will fix this? But Hannah's hope here is in God. She realizes that it's completely down to him. It's only God who can change things and turn it around for her. And she makes a promise here to God. She promises that if God gives her a son, that she will give him back to God, to go and work in the temple like Samson, to be a Nazarene, that his hair won't be cut, that he'll go and work in the temple. And when she does that, you see that later on in that story that actually that's what she does. She gives him back to God. And what does that remind you of? It reminds us of what happens later, as we see shown later on when Mary has Jesus and has to let go of Jesus and let Jesus go and do the things that he's been called to do. So there are times when we struggle and when we need to be real with God and just to trust him and to ask God to step in, ask God to show us what it is that we need to hold on to. So to trust God. Eli says to her, interesting, doesn't he? He says, after he's asked her, are you drunk? What's going on here? How come you're looking like a drunk woman? What's the problem? What's going on, sort of thing. And after that, when he's found out that she's not drunk, he says to her, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you've asked of him. So he says to her, go in peace, which is what we then see her do. But the fact that he says, may the God of Israel grant you what you've asked of him, again, pointing to who God is and what God does. So pointing to who God is, that he's the God of Israel. He's the same as he was. God hasn't changed. He's the God who did all those things that they knew about already in history that they'd seen happen. And he was the God who had the power to do something now. So giving hope that God will do something. And lastly, to hold on to those promises that we make to God. So just to wind up, Hannah's story is a story of finding peace amidst this hopelessness. It teaches us to be real, to pour out our pain to God, to pray, to come before God and find that place of being able to come back to trust God again, or to trust him to start with, whichever it may be. God knows your past. He knows your present, and he knows your future. He is there with you and wants to give you that peace and to encourage you today. So I just want to ask you to stand as we can just now ask God what it is that he's wanting to do for each one of us today. Maybe you want to hold your hands out. You don't have to hold your hands out, but for some people it's helpful. It's just a sign of saying, God, God, I'm open to you. I want to receive from you. I want you to give me what it is you want to give me today. And God, we just ask you now just to bring into our minds anything that you're wanting to encourage us with, to challenge us with, to bring healing to. Any change you want to break? Any lies that you want to break? Any challenges for us where we need to go and to say sorry to someone, ask for their forgiveness of things we might have said or done? It might be that you want to lay before him those unfulfilled dreams, those things you're still longing for, and say, God, I'm giving you this today. There might be a difficult relationship you want to bring before God. There might be an area of jealousy that you know you struggle with. Or fears over the future. Maybe it's fears over how am I going to make ends meet with the cost of everything going up, whatever it might be. It said in verse 19 of the story we read today that God remembered Hannah. Lord God, I just pray now that you will remember each one of us who is here and is listening online. Remember the things that we're crying out to you with. Lord God, we know that you are seated there on the throne, that you are the Almighty God, that you can give us peace, that you are with us, that you make a way, whatever that way is going to be. And as Eli said, may the God who gives peace give you peace, and may you know that God is the Almighty God. He's who he says he is. He's the same God now and always. If I can just invite the band back up. And for some of you, you might want to be prayed for this morning, to come and have someone come and stand alongside you, to make that sign of saying to God, today is the day that I've done like Hannah did in the Bible, like coming into that temple, and she went in there, went to find a place to meet with God. If that's you today and you want to do that, you're saying to God, I want to meet with you in this today, I just encourage you to come to the front as we sing this song, and people will come alongside and we'll pray for you. You don't have to tell them if you don't want to tell them what it is you're struggling with, but you're welcome to if you want to. But let's be at that place where we say to God, God, I really want to meet you in this. I want you to bring me peace. I want to know that you are the King of Kings, my King, my Almighty God in this today.